67 winters had carved lines into Thomas Reed's face, each wrinkle a testament to battles fought both on foreign soil and at home. The morning light filtered through tattered curtains, casting long shadows across the living room, where framed medals hung in perfect formation, silent witnesses to a lifetime of service now powerless against the paper, trembling in his weathered hands. Eviction notice. The bold letters seemed to pulse with cruel finality. Thomas sank into his armchair, the springs protesting beneath his weight. Just 3 months ago, everything had been manageable. Not comfortable, but manageable. Then came the chest pains that sent him to the emergency room, followed by tests, medications and bills that devoured his modest savings like a starving beast. Before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you are subscribed. Because tomorrow, I have saved something extra special for you. 42 years, he whispered to the empty room, his voice catching on the words. 42 years since he'd first donned the uniform, stood tall with his hand over his heart, and sworn to protect a country that now couldn't seem to find room for him. Outside, autumn leaves skittered across his small yard, the yard he'd tended meticulously every Saturday morning, where neighborhood children occasionally stopped to listen to his stories. The property wasn't much, but it was his refuge, the only place where the nightmares stayed at bay. The knock had come at 8:17 a.m. Thomas remembered checking his watch, an old habit from his military days. The county official had avoided his eyes, speaking in practiced, detached sentences about property taxes, legal requirements, and timelines. 14 days. That's all he had left. Thomas's fingers traced the outline of his wedding band, the gold, worn thin from years of devotion. Claire would have known what to do. She always did. But she had been gone 5 years now, leaving him to navigate this civilian battlefield alone. Rain began to patter against the windows, as if the sky itself mourned what was happening within these walls. Thomas Reed, who had carried wounded comrades across enemy lines, who had endured sleepless nights in desert trenches, who had returned home only to fight new wars against grief and pain, now faced an enemy he didn't know how to defeat. Tulati's home. Eviction notice slipped from his fingers, landing on the floor beside the table where a single framed photograph stood. Thomas, in uniform, smiling, believing in a future that had just been snatched away. Yesterday, a home. Today, just boxes. Thomas Reed's calloused hands shook as he wrapped his wife's china teacup in newspaper, the faded blue flowers disappearing beneath the black and white print of a world that had moved on without him. 40 years of memories reduced to cardboard containers labeled with a black marker that seemed to bleed into the silence of the emptying house. He moved methodically through each room, a soldier completing one final mission. In the bedroom closet, his fingers brushed against the folded uniform he hadn't worn in years, pressed and preserved as if waiting for a call to duty that would never come. Thomas paused, his weathered face reflected in the glass frame of a photograph. 3 young men in desert fatigues, arms slung around each other's shoulders, dust-covered grins beneath a merciless sun. Only he had returned. The medals went into a small wooden box his father had carved. Bronze star, Purple Heart, combat ribbons that once meant everything and now couldn't secure him 4 walls and a roof. The box fit perfectly beside the triangular case containing a flag, 13 precise folds, presented on behalf of a grateful nation that had somehow forgotten his address. Through the living room window, Thomas caught glimpses of neighbors passing by. Mrs. Henderson slowed her pace, concern etched across her face before she hurried along. The miller boy on his bicycle circled twice, curiosity battling with the discomfort of witnessing a life being dismantled. No one knocked. No one offered help, just silent observers to the quiet tragedy unfolding behind his screen door. Night fell as Thomas loaded the last box into his battered pickup truck. The cab smelled of old leather and the peppermints he kept in the glove compartment. He turned the key in the ignition but didn't drive away. Where would he go? Instead, he reclined the seat as far as the rusted mechanism allowed and spread, his old service jacket across his chest like a blanket. Stars pierced the darkness above, the same stars he'd gazed upon from desert outposts and mountain ridges in lands whose names most Americans couldn't pronounce. He'd survived those nights with nothing but faith in coming home. Now home was wherever this truck would take him, his dog tags cold against his skin, the only permanent address he had left. The morning light cut through Thomas's dreamless sleep, his aging bones protesting against the cramped confines of his pickup truck. As he shifted awake, he didn't notice Sarah Wilkins pausing on her morning jog, her breath catching at the sight of the elderly man using a folded American flag as a makeshift blanket, his weathered face peaceful despite his circumstances. Something about the scene struck her, the dignity in his posture even in sleep, the carefully arranged medals visible through the truck window, the small photo of a much younger Thomas in uniform propped against the dashboard. Without thinking, she raised her phone and captured the moment, her fingers hovering over the screen before typing a simple caption. This man served his country, now he sleeps outside. She hesitated only briefly before posting it, then continued her run, the image of Thomas Reed fading from her immediate thoughts, but now permanently etched in digital space. By midday, as Thomas sat in the local diner nursing a cup of coffee he could barely afford, his image had begun its silent journey across the vast landscape of social media. First shared by neighbors, then veterans groups, then strangers moved by the stark contradiction captured in 12 simple words and one powerful image. "More coffee, Mr. Reed?" asked Marge, the waitress who had known him for 15 years, who had served his wife pie every Sunday before her passing, who now looked at him with eyes that carried both sympathy and uncertainty. "Just water today, Marge. Watching my caffeine," he replied with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. What Thomas didn't see was Marge's teenage son in the back, showing her the viral post during her break, her hand flying to her mouth as she recognized her longtime customer in the photograph that now had thousands of shares, comments flooding in from across the country. "He fought for us. This is how we repay sacrifice? Where is he? Someone help him!" The digital wave was building, pixels and outrage combining into something unstoppable, while Thomas sat alone, unaware of his transformation from forgotten veteran to symbol of a system's failure. He sipped his water slowly, making it last, planning his next move while his image traveled screens across America, his private struggle now a public reckoning, his face the catalyst for a storm about to break. 30 miles away, Sergeant Mike Rivera scrolled mindlessly through his phone during a lunch break at the construction site where he now worked. His coffee had gone cold, his sandwich half-eaten when the image froze his fingers mid-swipe. A weathered face he hadn't seen in 15 years, but would recognize anywhere. Thomas Reed. Staff Sergeant Thomas Reed. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs as memories flooded back. The punishing heat of basic training, the voice that had pushed him further than he thought possible, the steady hand that had corrected his rifle stance. And later, in the chaos of combat, the same voice that had cut through gunfire with perfect clarity. "Stay low, Rivera, I'm coming for you." "You okay, man?" asked a co-worker, noticing Mike's sudden pallor. Mike couldn't answer, his eyes fixed on the caption beneath the photo. The man who had carried him through half a mile of hostile territory when shrapnel had torn through his leg was now sleeping in a pickup truck, covered by the same flag they had both sworn to defend. His fingers trembled as he opened the Brotherhood of Marines chat group. a private digital sanctuary where bonds forged in combat remained unbroken by time or distance. He shared the image, adding only, "This is Staff Sergeant Thomas Reed. He saved my life in Fallujah. He's homeless now. I'm finding him." Within minutes, the notification alerts became a steady buzz. Marines from across 4 states responding with increasing urgency. Reed, the Reed who ran training at Camp Lejeune in '05, that's the man who talked Johnson down during that hellish night in Kandahar. I've still got the letter he wrote to my mother when I was wounded. Mike watched as the posts transformed from shock to determination, plans forming in real time, a network awakening, coordinates being shared, resources mobilizing. What had begun as one Marine's recognition was swiftly becoming an operation with a clear objective: locate and extract a fallen brother. As the sun began its descent over the construction site, Mike made 3 calls: to his boss requesting emergency leave, to his wife explaining he'd be late, and finally to the Veterans Center where he volunteered. "I need transportation and supplies," he said firmly. "We found one of our own." Across the digital battlefield, the message spread through encrypted chats and private calls, a silent army assembling while Thomas Reed, unaware, watched another sunset from the confines of his truck, not knowing that the same loyalty he had once inspired was now marching toward him with unstoppable purpose. The war room was a dimly lit basement in the local VFW hall, but the energy surging through it rivaled any military command center. Computer screens glowed like beacons as keyboards clicked with urgent precision, each message sent carrying the weight of a mission too important to fail. Mike Rivera stood at the center, his phone constantly buzzing with new alerts, his voice steady as he directed the rapidly growing operation. "We need eyes on his location by 0600, he instructed, the military precision never having left his blood. "Peterson, what's the status on the donation fund?" A gray-haired veteran looked up from his laptop, eyes wide with disbelief. $28,000 in 3 hours, sir. And climbing. Outside the hall, engines roared to life as motorcycles bearing veteran insignias assembled in perfect formation. Their riders, men and women who had served across decades and conflicts, checked supplies strapped to their bikes, blankets, food, gift cards, and American flags. Some wore their old uniforms, others simple civilian clothes, but all carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of those who had once sworn the same oath as Thomas Reed. 200 miles away, Captain Sarah Lansing set down her phone, her hand trembling slightly as she faced her commanding officer. "Sir, permission to take emergency leave." When asked why, she simply showed him the viral photo and said, "He was my father's drill instructor. Dad always said he owed his life." To Staff Sergeant Reed, permission granted. Local news vans parked outside the hall captured footage of the growing assembly. Reporters speaking rapidly into cameras. "What we're witnessing here is nothing short of extraordinary, a spontaneous mobilization of military personnel responding to one of their own in crisis." Inside a small apartment, an elderly chaplain, who had served in 3 conflicts, carefully packed his service Bible, the pages worn from years of offering comfort in humanity's darkest moments. His arthritis ached, but some calls transcended physical pain. As dawn approached, a convoy of 20 vehicles lined up outside the hall. Trucks filled with supplies, cars carrying veterans, motorcycles ready to escort. A hand-painted banner stretched across the lead vehicle. "No man left behind." Mike checked his watch. It was 500 hours. In the half-light of early morning, he surveyed the assembled force, people who had dropped everything at a moment's notice for a man many had never met but all considered family. "Move out," he ordered quietly, and the convoy began its journey toward Thomas Reed, a man who had spent his life defending others and would soon discover he was not, after all, fighting his final battle alone. Microphones and cameras materialized like spring weeds after rain. logos from 6 different news stations crowding the quiet street where Thomas Reed's life had collapsed. Reporters stood with perfect posture, voices calibrated to convey just the right balance of outrage and compassion as their cameraman captured the modest home, now bearing an official eviction notice. We're live outside the home of Thomas Reed, a 67-year-old veteran with 42 years of service who now finds himself homeless after being unable to pay property taxes following catastrophic medical bills, announced Diane Martinez, her crimson blazer bright against the grey morning. Behind her, curious neighbors gathered at the edges of their properties, suddenly eager to share stories about the quiet man they had watched pack his belongings without offering help. "Oh, he's always been so kind," Mrs. Peterson told a reporter, conveniently forgetting how she'd hurried past his driveway just days before. "I had no idea things were so bad." Inside the county administrative building, phones rang without cease, each call more heated than the last. The mayor's assistant rushed through the hallway, files clutched to her chest, sweat beading along her hairline, as she pushed through the door without knocking. "Sir, it's escalating. The governor's office just called." The mayor looked up from his computer, where Dar's homeless veteran evicted trended across his screen, the comments beneath each share growing increasingly hostile toward his administration. His own phone buzzed with text messages from council members demanding immediate action, their previous silence on veteran services now inconvenient in the face of public scrutiny. "Get me whoever signed that eviction order," he ordered, loosening his tie, "and find out where Reed is staying now." Across town, the county tax assessor closed his office blinds as a news van pulled into the parking lot, ignoring the persistent knocking that followed. His assistant had already called in sick after her name appeared in an article detailing the bureaucratic process that had led to Thomas's eviction. Online, the outrage morphed into action. A crowdfunding page created by a stranger reached its goal in 17 minutes, then doubled it in 30. Hashtags evolved from anger to organization. "Udash find Thomas Reed," "Udash veteran strong," "Udash bring him home." A congressman's office issued a statement promising investigation. A celebrity veteran shared the story with his millions of followers. A retired general called 3 different news programs demanding accountability. And somewhere in his pickup truck, unaware of the storm-gathering force around him, Thomas Reed folded his flag with military precision before another night under the stars, not knowing that by sunrise, his private tragedy had become a national reckoning, a tipping point for a society suddenly forced to face what it had been too comfortable ignoring. Dawn broke like a promise across the horizon, painting the small town in shades of gold and amber. The convoy of vehicles moved with military precision, trucks polished to gleaming, motorcycles in perfect formation, flags rippling in the early morning breeze. They had traveled through the night, a silent force united by purpose, guided by loyalty that transcended time and circumstance. Sergeant Mike Rivera sat in the lead vehicle, his eyes scanning each street corner, each parking lot, his heart pounding with the urgency of a mission he couldn't bear to fail. The intel had been good. Thomas had been spotted at a gas station on the edge of town, his pickup truck becoming both transport and shelter. "There," said a voice from the back seat. "Blue Ford, northeast corner." Mike's breath caught in his throat as the convoy slowed, engines humming with restrained power. Through the windshield, he saw him, Staff Sergeant Thomas Reed, sitting on the tailgate of his truck, a can of beans balanced on his knee, spoon moving with the mechanical rhythm of a man who wasn't eating for pleasure, but survival. The convoy circled the station, creating a protective perimeter with military instinct. Thomas looked up, confusion spreading across his weathered face as vehicle after vehicle pulled in, surrounding him with a wall of solidarity. Mike was the first to step out, his combat boots hitting the pavement with purpose. Behind him emerged men and women in various stages of uniform, some retired, some active duty, all carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of those who had served. Their medals caught the morning light, a constellation of sacrifice and honor advancing toward one of their own. Thomas set down his can, standing slowly as recognition dawned in his eyes. Rivera? The name emerged as a whisper, disbelief etched in every line of his face. Staff Sergeant Reed, Mike replied, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break it. He stopped 3 feet away, snapped to attention, and delivered. A perfect salute. Thomas's hand trembled as he returned it, muscle memory bridging the 15-year gap between them. Then Mike closed the distance, arms wrapping around the man who had once carried him through gunfire and death. "We don't forget our own," he said, voice cracking with the weight of a promise fulfilled. Behind them, veterans stepped forward one by one, forming a circle around Thomas, not of curiosity, but of protection. In their eyes shone the same message, that the bond forged in service was unbreakable, that the oath they had taken extended beyond battlefield and uniform, that Thomas Reed would never again face another battle alone. The county administration building had never witnessed such an entrance. 23 veterans moving with silent discipline, their footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm across the marble floor. The receptionist's smile faltered as the formation approached, led by Thomas Reed and Mike Rivera, news cameras trailing behind them like shadows. "We're here to see Tax Commissioner Davis," Mike stated, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Immediately, nervous fingers reached for telephones, urgent whispers traveled through corridors, and within minutes, doors opened, revealing a hastily assembled group of officials in pressed suits, their faces carefully composed into expressions of professional concern. "Gentlemen, perhaps we could discuss this in private," suggested a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, eyeing the cameras with visible unease. "With respect, sir," Mike replied, the politeness in his tone belied by the steel beneath it. "Staff, Sergeant Reed's suffering wasn't private. Your office made sure of that when you posted an eviction notice on his door after 42 years of service to this country." The commissioner's face tightened. "This is a matter of policy. The county has procedures that must be followed regardless of procedures." The word exploded from Thomas's chest, startling even himself. Decades of military discipline cracked as he stepped forward. "I followed procedures when I was bleeding on foreign soil. I followed procedures for 42 years in uniform. I followed your procedures when I filed for medical assistance and was denied." Behind them, a veteran in a wheelchair positioned himself directly in front of a camera, his Purple Heart visible on his jacket. Another veteran, her prosthetic leg gleaming under the fluorescent lights, moved to stand beside Thomas. Silent solidarity radiating from her presence. Davis shuffled papers nervously. "The tax code doesn't allow for exceptions based on..." "The tax code," Mike interrupted, his voice now carrying to every corner of the building, "doesn't prevent human decency. It doesn't prevent a phone call before an eviction. It doesn't prevent exploring options for a man who gave everything for the freedoms that allow you to sit behind that desk." A reporter thrust a microphone forward. "Commissioner, how do you respond to allegations that Mr. Reed's multiple requests for veteran assistance programs were never processed by your office?" The color drained from Davis's face as cameras turned toward him, red lights blinking like warning signals. Behind him, assistants began frantically searching through files, the carefully constructed walls of bureaucracy crumbling under the weight of 23 unwavering stares and a nation now watching their every move. "Perhaps," Davis managed, sweat beading on his forehead, "we should review this case more thoroughly." The morning sky wept soft rain as the convoy of vehicles pulled to a stop before a modest 2-story house on Maple Street. The American flag hanging from the porch fluttered gently, droplets clinging to the stars and stripes like tears of redemption. Thomas Reed sat in the passenger seat of Mike's truck, his weathered hands clutching a small wooden box containing his medals, the only possessions he refused to let out of his sight. "We're here?" Mike said softly, placing a hand on the older man's shoulder. Thomas stared through the windshield, confusion etched across his face. "Where exactly is here?" Beyond the vehicles, a crowd had gathered despite the rain. Neighbors, holding welcome signs, veterans standing at attention, news crews positioning cameras beneath umbrellas. At the center stood a woman in a crisp blazer holding a blue folder, her eyes fixed on the truck where Thomas sat. "Come on, Sergeant," Mike urged gently. "There's something you need to see." Thomas stepped out into the light drizzle, his bones aching from nights spent in his pickup. The crowd parted like water before him, creating a path to the house's front steps. The woman approached, extending her hand. "Mr. Reed, I'm Catherine Wells from the Veterans Foundation. On behalf of 16,000 donors from across the country, we have something for you." She opened the blue folder, revealing a deed with Thomas's name printed in bold black letters. "This house is yours, Mr. Reed, fully paid for. No mortgage, no property taxes for life." Thomas's hand trembled as he reached for the document, his vision blurring. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake, Staff Sergeant," called a voice from the crowd. A burly man in a construction helmet stepped forward. "I'm Jim Calloway, Calloway Construction. My team and I will be renovating anything that needs fixing. New roof, new kitchen, whatever you need. My father served with men like you. This is personal for us." Before Thomas could respond, a delivery truck rounded the corner, followed by another and another. "That'll be the furniture," explained Catherine. "The community has donated everything from beds to bookshelves." A journalist stepped forward, microphone extended toward Thomas's face as cameras captured his expression, disbelief transforming into something deeper, more primal. The proud soldier who had refused to show weakness for decades felt his composure cracking beneath the weight. "Of unexpected grace, how does it feel to be home, Sergeant Reed?" the reporter asked. Thomas looked at the house, his house, then at the faces surrounding him, strangers united by a thread of humanity stronger than he dared to believe still existed. His voice, when it finally came, carried the weight of a man finding solid ground after years of free fall. It feels like America remembering her promise. The City Hall steps had never held so many people, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath a cloudless sky. Camera flashes punctuated the air like lightning as Mayor Wilson approached the microphone, his usually confident stride now measured and hesitant. Behind him stood a row of city officials, their faces solemn, their postures stiff with the discomfort of public contrition. Thomas Reed sat in the front row, flanked by Mike Rivera and a dozen other veterans whose medals gleamed in the afternoon sun. Their faces remained impassive, years of military discipline evident in their stillness as they watched the man who had allowed one of their own to slip through the cracks. "Today," the mayor began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "I stand before you not just as your elected official, but as a citizen who has failed in his most sacred duty, to honor those who have sacrificed everything for our freedom." The microphone captured the slight tremor in his words as he continued, "What happened to Staff Sergeant Thomas Reed was more than a bureaucratic oversight. It was a betrayal of the covenant between a nation and those who defend it." Thomas's eyes remained fixed on the ground, the weight of public attention sitting uncomfortably on his shoulders. He had never sought recognition for his service, had never expected it, and now found himself the reluctant face of a movement larger than himself. "Effective immediately," the mayor announced, papers trembling slightly in his hands. "I'm establishing the Veterans Priority Initiative, ensuring that no service member in our community will ever again face homelessness, hunger, or neglect." In the back of the crowd, a group of veterans from 3 different conflicts stood with signs bearing a simple message: remember them before they're forgotten. Their silent protest had transformed overnight into a rallying cry, echoing through state capitals and social media feeds across the country. General Claire Harrison, recently retired and now head of the state's Veterans Affairs Committee, rose from her seat and approached the podium. The mayor stepped aside with visible relief as she took his place, her decorated uniform commanding immediate respect. "The apology is noted," she stated, her voice clear and unwavering. But words must become action. Today, we present legislation that will transform how this nation treats its veterans, not with hollow gratitude, but with tangible support. The crowd erupted in applause as Thomas finally looked up, his eyes meeting those of a young soldier, in uniform, standing at attention at the edge of the gathering. In that silent exchange passed the torch of responsibility, a promise that what had happened to him would become not just a personal tragedy overcome, but a turning point in a nation's memory. Thomas Reed had lost a home and found an army, one still fighting not on distant battlefields, but on the front lines of remembrance. American flags lined the street like silent sentinels, their colors vivid against the clear blue sky, as Thomas Reed stood before the red ribbon stretched across the porch of what was now, almost unbelievably, his home. The renovations had been completed in record time, local contractors working day and night, refusing payment, saying only that it was the least we could do. The gathered crowd hummed with anticipation, a sea of faces, both military and civilian, united in this moment of redemption. Children sat on their parents' shoulders for a better view. Elderly veterans stood straight-backed despite aging bodies, and neighbors who had once looked away now stood witness, many with tears glistening in their eyes. Mike Rivera approached, with ceremonial scissors, their polished surface catching the sunlight. "Staff Sergeant Reed," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "on behalf of a grateful community and your brothers and sisters in arms, we welcome you home." Thomas's weathered hands trembled slightly as he accepted the scissors. For a man who had faced enemy fire without flinching, this moment of vulnerability before so many watching eyes proved almost more challenging. He cut the ribbon with a decisive snap, the red fabric falling away like the final barrier between himself and a dignity too long denied. Applause erupted, thunderous and immediate. Thomas blinked rapidly, fighting the emotion threatening to overwhelm his military composure. As planned, 4 Marines in dress blues approached the flagpole that had been installed in his front yard. With precise, practiced movements, they raised the American flag, the same flag that had once covered him in his truck during those desperate nights. It climbed skyward, catching the breeze at exactly the moment it reached full staff, unfurling. With a snap that silenced the crowd, someone pressed a microphone into Thomas's hand. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at the faces surrounding him, expectant, reverent, their attention a weight he had never sought. "I didn't ask for this," he began, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't fully contain. "I just did what I was trained to do, what any of us would have done." He gestured toward the veterans standing at attention nearby. "But I'm grateful my brothers and sisters remembered me." His voice broke on the final word, the simple truth of it cutting through formality and ceremony. "When you serve, they tell you no one gets left behind. Today I understood that promise doesn't end when the uniform comes off." The microphone captured his shaky inhale as he looked at his new home, then back at the crowd. "Today, I'm not just moving into a house. I'm being reminded what home really means." The door to the Veterans Center swung open every Tuesday at precisely a new 700 hours, Thomas Reed's military punctuality still running like clockwork in his veins. The morning light caught the silver in his hair as he arranged chairs in a perfect circle, brewed coffee strong enough to keep a soldier alert during midnight watch, and set out the day's paperwork with methodical precision. 3 months had passed since the ribbon-cutting ceremony, since he had stood speechless before a house that bore his name on its deed. 3 months of sleeping in a real bed, of waking without the chill of night air seeping through truck windows, of neighbors stopping by with casseroles and handshakes instead of averted gazes. "Morning, Staff Sergeant," called a voice from the doorway. Riley Jackson, 24 years old, Afghanistan veteran, left leg missing below the knee. Last month, he'd barely spoken during group sessions. Today, he carried a folder of completed housing applications, his posture straighter than Thomas had seen before. "How's the pain today?" Thomas asked, not just as protocol, but with the knowing concern of someone who understood that some wounds remained invisible. "Manageable, sir," Riley answered, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Found that apartment you told me about, the one with the accessible bathroom." Thomas nodded, satisfaction warming his chest. One more soldier who wouldn't sleep in a car, wouldn't face the cold alone. The tally in his notebook grew. 17 veterans helped with housing this month alone, 32 connected with medical services, 15 enrolled in education programs they hadn't known existed. By midday, the center hummed with activity. In one corner, Mike Rivera leaned over blueprints for their expanding operation, now supported by donations flowing in from across the country. What had begun as emergency rescue had transformed into systematic prevention, identifying at-risk veterans before they reached crisis, creating a safety net that wouldn't unravel at the first unexpected medical bill or job loss. "Thomas," Mike called, waving him over. "The governor's office just approved our proposal, full tax exemption for veterans with service-connected disabilities." A cheer erupted from the staff, but Thomas simply nodded, emotion tightening his throat. He thought of the eviction notice that had once trembled in his hands, how it had seemed like an ending rather than the beginning it had become. That evening, as Thomas locked up the center, he paused to watch the flag being lowered outside, its colors catching the last light of day. A young veteran stood nearby, his haunted eyes reminiscent of what Thomas had seen in his own mirror not long ago. "First time here?" Thomas asked gently. The young man nodded, uncertainty written across his face. Thomas extended his hand, the same hand that had once packed his life into boxes, now reaching out to ensure another wouldn't have to do the same. "Welcome, home soldier," he said. "You're not alone anymore." Golden light spilled across the horizon, painting the world in shades of amber and rose as Thomas Reed settled into the hand-crafted rocking chair on his front porch. Steam rose from his coffee mug, curling toward the awakening sky like prayers of thanksgiving. 6 months had passed since the day he'd cut that red ribbon, yet each morning still felt like a miracle. The solid roof above, the warm bed behind, the community around him that had refused to let him fade into invisible suffering. His eyes drifted to the small brass plaque mounted beside his front door, installed during a quiet ceremony attended by veterans spanning 5 decades of service. The morning sunlight caught its engraved words, "In honor of those who served and still serve." His weathered finger had traced those letters countless times, feeling the depth of their meaning beyond the shallow grooves in metal. Across the street, a young family emerged from their home, the father in his National Guard uniform, preparing to leave for weekend duty. He caught Thomas's eye and offered a crisp salute, a gesture of respect between generations of service, a silent promise of continued vigilance. Thomas returned it with practiced precision, his body remembering what his joints sometimes protested. The uniform changes, he thought, watching the guardsman embrace his children before departure. The sacrifice remains the same. In the distance, the Veterans Center where he now spent his days would soon be opening its doors to those still fighting battles long after returning home. On his coffee table inside lay applications for 3 more veterans who needed housing assistance. The work continued, the mission evolved but never ended. Thomas sipped his coffee, watching the sun climb higher above the American flag gently, waving in his front yard. No longer his blanket during desperate nights, but a symbol of what could be restored when a nation remembered its promise. Service doesn't end with discharge, and neither should our gratitude.